The wild is not your friend. It tests your nerves, punishes your mistakes, and sometimes refuses to let you leave. From a careless meat hanged to a man in a wolf mask, these stories go from deadly real to deeply unsettling. These are the stories of seasoned hunters pushed beyond their limits by nature and predators. In this video, we explore 6 chilling encounters where a hunting trip turned into a fight for survival, or something stranger. The Flat Creek Valley had earned its reputation as one of Montana's premier backcountry hunting destinations by the summer of 2025. Nestled between towering granite peaks and fed by glacial streams, the valley's dense fir forests had provided sanctuary for elk herds for generations. The region's remoteness, accessible only by a winding dirt road that terminated at an abandoned logging station, made it a favorite among serious hunters seeking solitude. What many visitors failed to fully appreciate was that the same pristine wilderness that attracted elk also drew grizzly bears in significant numbers, particularly during the summer months when salmon runs filled the valley's streams. Timothy Larson, a 41-year-old outfitter from Boise, had been guiding hunters through these woods for over 15 years. His reputation for finding trophy elk was matched only by his strict adherence to safety protocols in what he often described as an unforgiving country. On July 8, 2025, Timothy led a party of 8 hunters deep into the valley's interior, following well-worn game trails that wound through towering Douglas firs and across meadows carpeted with mountain wildflowers. The group included brothers Caleb Beck and Shane Beck, both experienced outdoorsmen from Colorado who had hunted with Timothy on 3 previous occasions. The remaining 5 hunters were younger clients ranging in age from 22 to 35, all participating in their first guided wilderness hunt. Each member of the party carried regulation bear spray, though Timothy had noticed with growing concern that several hunters had chosen to stow their canisters in their backpacks rather than keeping them readily accessible on their belts. The hunting party had established their base camp in a clearing approximately 6 miles from the nearest road access. Timothy had selected the location based on fresh elk sign and proximity to water, while ensuring adequate distance from known bear corridors. The camp consisted of 4 lightweight tents arranged in a defensive semicircle, with a designated cooking area positioned downwind and 100 yards from the sleeping quarters. By late evening on July 8th, the hunters had successfully taken down a magnificent 5-point bull elk in a meadow roughly 2 miles from camp. The animal, estimated at nearly 700 pounds, represented exactly the type of trophy that had drawn the group to this remote location. As darkness approached, the hunters faced the challenging task of field dressing the animal and transporting the meat back to their base camp. Timothy had repeatedly emphasized the critical importance of proper meat storage in grizzly country. His standard protocol required hanging all game meat at least 12 feet high and a minimum of 200 yards from any sleeping area. However, as the group worked by headlamp to process their kill, fatigue and excitement began to cloud judgment. Caleb Beck, despite his experience, made the decision that would prove catastrophic. Arguing that the group would be breaking camp at dawn and that the meat would be easier to pack if stored closer to their tents, he convinced his brother Shane to help hang the elk quarters from a sturdy pine tree just 50 yards from their sleeping area. Timothy discovered their deviation from the protocol only after the meat had been secured. And though he expressed his displeasure, he chose not to force the issue given the late hour and the exhaustion evident in his clients. At approximately 2:14 in the morning, a massive male grizzly bear, later estimated at nearly 900 pounds, detected the scent of fresh elk meat and began investigating the camp. The bear's approach was initially cautious, but the proximity of the meat to human habitation triggered an aggressive response that wildlife experts would later describe as predictable under the circumstances. The first indication of trouble came when Shane Beck was awakened by the sound of heavy breathing outside his tent. Before he could fully process what was happening, the bear had begun tearing into the hanging meat cache, causing a tremendous crashing sound as equipment and tree branches fell to the ground. The commotion awakened the entire camp, but the darkness and confusion that followed prevented any coordinated response. 3 hunters, including one of the younger clients, were attacked while attempting to flee their tents. The bear's massive size and speed made escape nearly impossible in the confined space of the camp. 2 additional hunters, including Caleb Beck, were dragged into the surrounding forest when they attempted to defend themselves using tent poles and camp equipment as weapons. Timothy managed to activate his satellite phone and began transmitting a distress signal, while Shane Beck fired emergency flares into the darkness in an attempt to scare the bear away. The animal, however, had become territorial around the meat cache and continued its attack despite the noise and light. By sunrise, only Timothy and Nolan Priest, the youngest member of the hunting party, remained alive. Search and rescue teams arriving by helicopter later that morning found evidence of the attack scattered across an area spanning nearly 300 yards. The investigation that followed determined that the bear had been defending what it considered its territory and food source. Timothy Larson never returned to professional guiding following the tragedy. He now conducts wilderness safety seminars throughout Idaho, using the events of that July night as a sobering reminder of how a single, poor decision in bear country can escalate into unthinkable consequences. During his presentations, he emphasizes that survival in the wilderness often depends on seemingly minor choices that can have profound and irreversible outcomes. The Goose River Basin had served as a traditional hunting ground for indigenous peoples for centuries before European settlers arrived in the late 1800s. By 1996, the region remained largely untouched, with its vast marshlands and boreal forests providing habitat for some of Canada's largest moose populations. The area's remoteness, accessible only by snowmobile during winter months, made it particularly attractive to hunters seeking trophy bulls that had grown to impressive sizes in relative isolation. Grant Halverson, a 34-year-old mechanic from Winnipeg, had been planning this late-season moose hunt for over 2 years. Accompanied by his cousin Doug Barrett, a more experienced hunter who had taken 3 bulls in the region during previous seasons, Grant hoped to fill his tag before the season closed at month's end. The temperature had dropped to minus 12 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wetlands that characterized the Goose River Basin had become frozen solid, creating an otherworldly landscape of ice-covered ponds and snow-laden spruce trees. The hunters had established their base camp near the ruins of an abandoned ice fishing operation that had operated during the 1970s. The skeletal remains of processing equipment and a partially collapsed wooden structure provided some windbreak, though both men relied primarily on their heated tent and portable propane heaters to combat the bitter cold. Doug had chosen this location based on a fresh moose sign he had discovered during a scouting trip in early November, including well-worn trails leading to browse areas along the river's edge. On the morning of December the 13th, 1996, the hunters spotted their quarry while conducting a systematic search of the frozen marshland. A massive bull moose, estimated at well over 1,200 pounds, stood silhouetted against the tree line on the far side of a frozen lake. The animal's impressive antler spread, which Doug estimated at close to 60 inches, marked it as exactly the type of trophy Grant had traveled so far to find. Grant positioned himself approximately 120 yards from the moose, using his .300 Winchester Magnum rifle equipped with a high-powered scope. The bitter cold made precision shooting challenging, as both the rifle's action and Grant's hands had begun to stiffen despite his insulated gloves. Doug positioned himself slightly behind and to the left of his cousin, ready to provide backup if needed. The shot, when it came, struck the moose in the shoulder region rather than the intended vital area behind the front leg. Instead of the clean kill both hunters had expected, the wounded bull wheeled around and, in a display of behavior that violated every assumption about moose psychology, charged directly toward the hunters across the frozen lake surface. Grant attempted to reload his rifle for a follow-up shot, but his thick gloves interfered with the bolt action mechanism. Doug shouted warnings about the approaching animal, but the bull had already covered half the distance between them and showed no signs of slowing. The sight of a 1,200-pound animal charging at full speed across the ice created a scenario neither hunter had prepared for or could have anticipated. As Grant struggled with his rifle, he attempted to backpedal away from the charging moose while maintaining his shooting position. The combination of icy conditions and heavy winter clothing caused him to lose his footing just as the bull reached striking distance. The moose's massive antlers, spanning nearly 5 feet from tip to tip, caught Grant's shoulder and launched him sideways into a snowbank that had accumulated against the shoreline. Doug, recognizing the immediate danger to his cousin, fired a warning shot into the air using his own rifle. The sudden crack of the gunshot, amplified by the cold air and open space, finally caused the wounded bull to veer away from the hunters and retreat towards the forest. The moose disappeared into the dense spruce trees, leaving a trail of blood on the snow that both hunters would later follow unsuccessfully. Grant suffered 3 cracked ribs and significant bruising to his shoulder and back from the impact with both the moose's antlers and the frozen ground. More seriously, the extended exposure to sub-zero temperatures while lying in the snow had caused frostbite to develop on his hands and face. Doug used the emergency radio in their camp to call for assistance, though the remote location meant that rescue would be several hours away. The hunters spent the remainder of the day in their heated tent, treating Grant's injuries and monitoring his condition for signs of hypothermia. A search and rescue team reached their location the following morning, evacuating Grant to a regional hospital where he received treatment for his injuries and frostbite. Years later, Grant would often recount the story with a mixture of humor and disbelief, describing it as the only time he had ever been out hunted by something with hooves. The experience taught both hunters valuable lessons about shot placement, equipment reliability in extreme conditions, and the unpredictable nature of wounded game animals in their native environment. Perry County's hardwood ridges had been shaped by generations of selective logging and natural succession, creating an ideal habitat for both white-tailed deer and the predators that followed them. By 2003, coyote populations had expanded significantly throughout Alabama, adapting to the mixed forest environment and developing pack behaviors that differed markedly from their western counterparts. The rolling hills and dense understory provided perfect cover for these intelligent predators who had learned to exploit the hunting seasons by scavenging wounded game and gut piles left by hunters. Marcus Delroy, a 38-year-old insurance adjuster from Birmingham, had been bow hunting the same ridge system for over a decade. His familiarity with the area's deer patterns had led to consistent success during previous seasons, and he had developed a network of tree stands positioned along well-established travel corridors, The particular stand he occupied on October 5, 2003, sat 20 feet above the ground in a mature pine tree overlooking a natural funnel where deer move between bedding areas and a white oak grove heavy with acorns. Marcus had arrived at his stand well before dawn, climbing the portable ladder in darkness and settling in for what he anticipated would be a productive evening hunt. The early October weather remained warm enough that he wore only lightweight camouflage clothing, and he had left his sidearm locked in his truck, confident that Alabama's predators posed no significant threat to a hunter positioned high above the ground. As sunset approached, Marcus began hearing the distinctive howls that had become increasingly common in Perry County during recent years. Initially, the vocalizations seemed to come from a single animal, possibly a lone coyote, announcing its presence to potential pack members. However, as darkness settled over the ridge, the howling multiplied and grew closer to his position. When Marcus finally looked down from his elevated position, he discovered 7 pairs of eyes reflecting his small pinlight beam. The coyotes had arranged themselves in a rough circle around the base of his tree, exhibiting behavior that he had never witnessed or heard described by other hunters. Rather than the typical skittish response expected from wild canids, these animals displayed a calculated patience that seemed almost predatory in nature. The pack's behavior defied everything Marcus understood about coyote psychology. Instead of scattering at the first sign of human presence, they maintained their positions and began what could only be described as a coordinated vigil. Several animals paced back and forth beneath the tree while others lay down as if prepared to wait indefinitely. Their occasional growls and yips suggested communication within the group, though Marcus could not interpret the meaning of their vocalizations. As hours passed, Marcus began to understand the gravity of his situation. His cell phone showed a weak signal, but he hesitated to make calls that might attract attention to his predicament. The coyotes showed no signs of losing interest in his presence, and their persistent attention suggested they were either extremely curious about the human scent or had some other motivation for maintaining their vigil. The psychological impact of being trapped above a pack of predators began to affect Marcus's judgment and comfort level. Every sound from the forest floor drew his attention, and he found himself constantly checking to ensure that none of the coyotes were attempting to climb the tree or find alternative routes to his position. The portable ladder he had used to reach the stand suddenly seemed inadequate as a barrier between himself and the persistent pack below. By midnight, Marcus had consumed most of his water and was beginning to feel the effects of prolonged immobility in the tree stand. The coyotes' behavior had become even more puzzling, as several animals appeared to be sleeping while others maintained watch positions. Their apparent comfort with the situation suggested they had no intention of abandoning their vigil anytime soon. The October night grew progressively colder, and Marcus found himself struggling to maintain warmth in his lightweight hunting clothes. His hands had begun to lose dexterity, making it difficult to operate his bow effectively should the opportunity arise. The irony of his situation was not lost on him. He had climbed the tree to hunt deer, only to become the subject of apparent interest from a pack of coyotes. At approximately 3:30 in the morning, Marcus's cell phone battery finally died, eliminating his last connection to the outside world. The coyotes remained below, their patience seemingly inexhaustible. Marcus began to wonder if he would be forced to spend the entire night in the tree, exposed to the elements and increasingly uncomfortable in his precarious position. The pack's vigil continued until the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Only then did the coyotes begin to disperse, disappearing into the forest with the same silent efficiency they had demonstrated throughout the night. Marcus waited an additional hour before climbing down from his stand, his legs numb from the extended period of immobility. The experience fundamentally changed Marcus's approach to hunting. He never again ventured into the woods without a sidearm and backup communication device. Years later, he would describe the encounter as a humbling reminder that intelligence in the animal kingdom often exceeded human expectations, noting that he had encountered bucks that season, but none as smart as those coyotes. The pine forests of Union County had witnessed significant historical events, serving as a corridor for both Union and Confederate forces during the Civil War. By 2017, the area remained largely undeveloped, with dense stands of loblolly and shortleaf pines covering rolling hills that stretched for miles without interruption. The region's remoteness and thick canopy made it popular among hunters seeking solitude, though the uniform appearance of the forest had claimed more than one unwary visitor who ventured too far from established trails. Samuel Beasley, a 29-year-old construction foreman from Little Rock, had discovered the area during a weekend scouting trip the previous spring. The abundance of deer sign and the absence of other hunters had convinced him to return during muzzleloader season, despite warnings from local residents about the ease of becoming disoriented in the seemingly endless pine groves. Samuel's confidence in his navigation skills, honed during years of hunting in various Arkansas locations, led him to dismiss these concerns as exaggerated. On November 11, 2017, Samuel parked his truck at the end of a gravel road that terminated near the remnants of an old Civil War encampment. Historical markers indicated that Confederate forces had established a temporary supply depot in the area during 1863, though little remained beyond some earthen berms and scattered artifacts. Samuel's plan involved following deer trails deep into the forest interior, marking his route with surveyor's tape, and establishing a hunting position along a ridge that offered multiple shooting lanes. The morning hunt proceeded according to plan, with Samuel penetrating approximately 3 miles into the pine forest before selecting a suitable location. His GPS unit showed strong signal reception, and he had marked waypoints at regular intervals to ensure his safe return. The hunting pressure in the area appeared minimal, as evidenced by the relaxed behavior of several deer he observed during his approach. Around midday, an unusual weather phenomenon began to develop over the region. A dense fog, seemingly emerging from nowhere, began to settle through the pine canopy with remarkable speed. Within minutes, visibility dropped to less than 15 feet, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that transformed the familiar forest into an alien landscape. Samuel's GPS unit, which had been functioning perfectly throughout the morning, suddenly lost satellite reception due to the atmospheric conditions. The fog's thickness exceeded anything Samuel had experienced during his years of outdoor activities. The uniformity of the pine forest, which had seemed manageable in clear conditions, became a maze of identical trees and indistinguishable terrain features. When Samuel attempted to retrace his route using the surveyor's tape he had placed earlier, he discovered that the markers had either been removed or were invisible in the dense fog. As afternoon faded into evening, Samuel's initial confidence gave way to growing concern about his situation. The fog showed no signs of lifting, and his attempts to navigate using compass bearings proved futile in the featureless terrain. Every direction looked identical, and the absence of distinctive landmarks made it impossible to determine his location relative to his starting point. Samuel spent the first night huddled beneath a large pine tree, wrapped in an emergency thermal blanket he carried in his hunting pack. The fog persisted through the night, accompanied by an eerie silence that seemed to muffle even the normal sounds of the forest. His emergency whistle, blown at regular intervals, produced no response from potential rescuers or other hunters who might be in the area. By the second day, dehydration and psychological stress began to take their toll on Samuel's decision-making abilities. The continued presence of the fog created a disorienting environment that seemed to play tricks on his perception. The psychological impact of being lost in the featureless pine forest proved more challenging than the physical discomfort. Samuel's usual confidence in his outdoor skills eroded as he repeatedly failed to find familiar landmarks or establish his position. The fog's persistence made him question whether he was experiencing some form of environmental phenomenon beyond his understanding. During his second night in the forest, Samuel's condition worsened. Dehydration and exhaustion made it increasingly difficult to think clearly, and the dense, fog-shrouded forest seemed to distort sound in unsettling ways. At times he paused to listen, uncertain whether the faint noises he heard were animals, shifting trees, or distant human activity. Search and rescue operations began when Samuel failed to return home as scheduled. His last known GPS coordinates, recorded before the fog's arrival, provided searchers with a starting point for their efforts. The search teams, equipped with thermal imaging equipment and GPS navigation, were able to locate Samuel approximately 1.7 miles from his original parking location. The rescue team found Samuel in a state of severe dehydration and mild hypothermia, though he was conscious and able to communicate. His condition required immediate medical attention, and he was evacuated to a regional hospital where he recovered fully from his ordeal. The fog that had trapped him dissipated shortly after his rescue, leaving no explanation for its unusual persistence or density. Samuel's experience in the pine forest fundamentally changed his approach to hunting and outdoor activities. He never again ventured into unfamiliar territory without multiple backup navigation systems and communication devices. Years later, he would describe the experience as a humbling reminder that the forest possessed an intelligence of its own, noting that it seemed to listen to those who entered its domain and respond in ways that defied conventional understanding. The Blue Hills region of northern Wisconsin had served as a logging center during the early 1900s, with vast networks of roads carved through the forest to transport timber to regional mills. By 2010, nature had begun to reclaim much of this infrastructure, leaving behind scenic corridors that provided access to remote lakes and camping areas. The region's recovering forest ecosystem had attracted a healthy population of black bears, which had learned to associate human camps with easy food sources. Roger Dane, a 33-year-old electrician from Milwaukee, had organized a summer camping and archery practice trip with 3 longtime friends. The group had discovered their lakeside campsite during a fishing trip the previous year, drawn by its combination of scenic beauty and isolation from other campers. The location, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that followed an abandoned logging route, seemed perfect for their planned activities. The campsite occupied a small clearing beside a pristine lake surrounded by mixed hardwood and pine forest. An old logging road provided vehicle access to within 50 yards of the water's edge, where the group had established their base camp complete with tents, cooking equipment, and a large cooler stocked with food for their 3-day stay. Roger had brought his compound bow and portable target setup, planning to maintain his shooting skills during the off-season. On the afternoon of June 16, 2010, Roger was engaged in target practice while his friends explored the lake's shoreline in search of potential fishing spots. His shooting routine was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a juvenile black bear, estimated at approximately 200 pounds, which wandered boldly into their campsite. The bear showed no fear of human presence, immediately investigating the various items scattered around the camp. Before Roger could react, the bear had seized the group's large cooler and begun dragging it toward the forest. The sight of a bear casually making off with their food supply struck Roger and his friends as more amusing than threatening. They followed the bear's trail through the woods, maintaining a respectful distance while documenting the incident with their cameras. The following morning, the group located their cooler approximately half a mile from camp, completely empty and bearing significant claw marks. Roger's friends found the entire episode entertaining, joking about their first encounter with local wildlife. They retrieved the damaged cooler and returned to camp, assuming the bear had satisfied its curiosity and would not return. That afternoon, Roger's friends departed for a day-long fishing expedition on a neighboring lake, leaving him alone at the campsite to continue his archery practice. He had just completed a shooting session and was retrieving arrows from his target when the same bear reappeared at the camp perimeter. This time, however, the animal's behavior seemed distinctly different from its previous visit. Instead of investigating camp equipment or searching for food, the bear approached directly and began examining the tent area where Roger had been sleeping. Its body language suggested confidence rather than curiosity, and it showed no inclination to flee when Roger shouted warnings and waved his arms. The bear's persistence in exploring the camp despite Roger's presence indicated a level of boldness that exceeded normal bear behavior. Roger attempted to drive the bear away by firing a practice arrow into a nearby tree stump, hoping the sudden noise would frighten the animal. Instead of retreating, the bear interpreted this action as some form of challenge or threat. It reared up on its hind legs, displaying its full height and strength, before dropping down and charging directly toward Roger's position. The bear's charge covered the distance between them with surprising speed, forcing Roger to abandon his bow and sprint toward the group's vehicle. He managed to reach the vehicle and lock himself inside just as the bear arrived at the driver's side door. Through the windows, Roger watched in amazement as the bear began investigating the vehicle's exterior, standing on its hind legs to peer through the windows and using its claws to scratch at the side mirrors. The bear's behavior suggested a level of intelligence and problem-solving ability that Roger had not anticipated. Rather than losing interest and wandering away, the animal seemed determined to reach Roger inside the vehicle. It circled the vehicle multiple times, testing door handles and examining potential entry points. The bear's persistence created a siege-like situation that lasted for over an hour. Eventually, the bear's attention was diverted by sounds from the forest, and it wandered away from the campsite. Roger remained in the vehicle for an additional hour, ensuring the animal had truly departed before venturing outside. When he finally emerged, he discovered that his bow remained embedded in the tree stump where he had fired his warning shot, abandoned during his hasty retreat. Roger's friends returned to find him packed and ready to leave immediately. His account of the bear's aggressive behavior convinced them that the animal had associated their campsite with territory worth defending. They loaded their equipment quickly and departed that evening, leaving Roger's bow behind as an unintended monument to their encounter. The experience taught Roger valuable lessons about bear behavior and the importance of proper food storage in bear country. He never again camped in areas with known bear activity without appropriate precautions and deterrent devices. Years later, he would describe the incident as a humbling reminder that wild animals operate according to their own logic, which often differs significantly from human expectations. The bear's return to the campsite demonstrated that these animals possess longer memories and more complex motivations than many people realize. Roger's understanding of wildlife behavior evolved considerably following this encounter, leading him to approach future outdoor activities with greater respect for the intelligence and unpredictability of forest inhabitants. The region known as Flatwood was characterized by an expansive plateau covered in mixed hardwood forest, typical of central Pennsylvania's rugged upland terrain. As of 2019, much of the land remained privately owned, divided among hunting clubs and timber interests that managed it for both recreational use and resource extraction. Its remote location and limited public access created an environment where unusual events could unfold with little chance of immediate outside observation. Dylan Wakefield, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Philadelphia, had secured hunting permission through a family connection to one of the private clubs operating in the area. Accompanied by his childhood friend Tyler Goodwin, Dylan planned to take advantage of Pennsylvania's early archery season to pursue white-tailed deer in an area that received minimal hunting pressure. The isolation that made the location attractive also meant that emergency services were hours away from any potential incident. The hunting tract encompassed several thousand acres of mature forest, accessible only through a series of gated logging roads that required special permission to traverse. Dylan and Tyler had established separate hunting positions approximately 1 mile apart, connected by a network of walking trails that allowed them to communicate without interfering with each other's hunting activities. Their plan involved hunting independently during daylight hours while maintaining radio contact for safety purposes. On September 29, 2019, the hunters began their third day in the remote location. Tyler had reported a successful sighting of several deer during the previous 2 days, though he had not yet taken a shot. Dylan's position had proven less productive, but he remained optimistic about his chances given the apparent abundance of deer sign throughout the area. During the second day, Tyler had begun noticing unusual signs around his hunting blind. Boot prints, clearly made by human feet rather than wildlife, appeared to circle his position at a distance of approximately 50 yards. The prints were fresh and showed a distinctive tread pattern that did not match either hunter's footwear. Tyler initially dismissed these findings as evidence of other hunters or landowners conducting routine property inspections. More disturbing was Tyler's discovery of tree branches that had been deliberately arranged in geometric patterns near his blind. The arrangements appeared intentional rather than natural, suggesting that someone had been observing his position and marking it in some way. Tyler reported these findings to Dylan via radio, though both men struggled to develop a reasonable explanation for the unusual activity. On the third night, Tyler's radio communications described hearing a whistle that seemed to come from the forest around his position. The sound was clearly artificial, produced by human lips rather than any wildlife species native to Pennsylvania. The whistle was repeated at irregular intervals throughout the night, sometimes appearing to come from different directions, as if the person producing it was moving through the forest. Dylan walked to Tyler's position the following morning to investigate the reports firsthand. What he discovered exceeded even Tyler's descriptions of the unusual activity. Deep claw marks had been carved into the wooden walls of Tyler's hunting blind, created by some type of tool rather than animal claws. The marks appeared fresh and had been made with considerable force, suggesting either significant strength or extreme motivation on the part of whoever created them. The psychological impact of discovering evidence of human stalking in such a remote location proved more unsettling than any wildlife encounter either hunter had experienced. The isolation that had initially attracted them to the area now seemed threatening, as it meant that any person observing their activities could do so without fear of discovery or intervention by others. Tyler and Dylan decided to abandon their hunting trip and return to civilization immediately. As they packed their equipment and prepared to leave, they discovered that someone had constructed a small cairn of stacked stones on the tailgate of their pickup truck. The structure had not been present when they arrived, and its appearance suggested that their observer had approached their vehicle during the night. The drive out of the hunting area required navigating several miles of narrow logging roads before reaching the main highway. As they approached the final gate that marked the boundary of the private hunting tract, Tyler observed a figure standing just beyond the tree line in his rearview mirror. The individual appeared to be wearing some type of animal mask or headdress that gave them a distinctly non-human silhouette. The figure made no movement toward the departing hunters, but its presence at the exact moment of their departure suggested that their activities had been under continuous observation. Tyler accelerated through the gate and did not look back until they reached the main highway several miles away. Neither hunter spoke during the remainder of their journey home. The incident had a profound impact on both men's approach to hunting and outdoor recreation. They never returned to the Flatwoods Township area, despite the excellent hunting opportunities it offered. Neither hunter reported the incident to local authorities, partly due to the bizarre nature of their claims, and partly due to an unspoken agreement that some experiences were better left unexamined. Dylan's initial reaction focused on documenting the evidence they had discovered, photographing the claw marks, boot prints, and stone cairn before departing the area. However, upon reviewing the images weeks later, he noticed details that had escaped his attention during the stress of the moment. The boot prints showed a distinctive wear pattern that suggested the person had been walking with an unusual gait, possibly limping or deliberately altering their stride to create confusion about their identity. The claw marks carved into Tyler's blind displayed a level of precision that indicated familiarity with woodworking tools. The depth and consistency of the gouges suggested that whoever created them had taken considerable time and effort to complete the task. This deliberate investment of energy implied that the stalking behavior represented more than casual curiosity about the hunter's presence. Further analysis of their experience revealed a pattern of escalating psychological intimidation that seemed designed to drive them from the area. The progression from simple observation to direct interaction with their equipment suggested that their stalker possessed considerable knowledge of psychological manipulation techniques. The timing of each incident had been carefully calculated to maximize fear and confusion while avoiding direct confrontation. Tyler's subsequent research into the history of the Flatwoods Township area revealed several unsolved incidents involving missing hunters and unexplained disappearances dating back over 2 decades. Local law enforcement records, obtained through Freedom of Information requests, documented at least 6 cases of hunters who had failed to return from trips to the region. While most cases were eventually classified as accidents or voluntary disappearances, the frequency of incidents seemed statistically unusual for such a sparsely populated area. The psychological impact of their experience extended beyond simple fear of returning to the hunting area. Both men reported difficulty sleeping and persistent feelings of being watched, even in urban environments. Tyler developed a compulsion to check and recheck the locks on his home, while Dylan found himself constantly scanning crowds for individuals whose appearance or behavior seemed unusual. These symptoms gradually diminished over time, though neither hunter ever fully recovered their previous sense of security in wilderness settings. Professional consultation with a psychologist who specialized in trauma associated with stalking behavior provided some insight into their experience. The expert explained that individuals who engage in this type of behavior often selected remote locations specifically because they offered opportunities to exercise control over others without risk of intervention. The use of animal symbolism, such as the wolf mask, frequently indicated an individual who had developed a fantasy identity that justified their actions. The decision not to report the incident to authorities proved increasingly difficult to justify as time passed. Both hunters struggled with the possibility that their silence might have enabled their stalker to target other victims. However, the remote location and the bizarre nature of their claims made them reluctant to subject themselves to potential ridicule or disbelief from law enforcement officials who might not take their reports seriously. Years later, Dylan would describe the encounter as a reminder that the wilderness could harbor human dangers that were far more disturbing than any wildlife threat. The incident raised questions about the type of individuals who might inhabit remote areas and the motivations behind their behavior. The experience reinforced the importance of hunting in groups and maintaining communication with the outside world when venturing into isolated locations. The memory of the human figure in the wolf mask remained vivid for both hunters, serving as a permanent reminder that some predators walked on two legs rather than four. Their experience highlighted the vulnerability of outdoor enthusiasts who ventured into remote areas without adequate preparation for human threats. The incident fundamentally altered their understanding of wilderness safety, expanding their awareness beyond natural hazards to include the possibility of deliberate human malevolence in locations where help was hours away.